Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Chess Masters. I'm Orange Bamboo, and you are very lucky because you are about to walk into the wonderful world of chess. Chess is a game played on an 8x8 grid of 64 squares, alternating from a dark square to a light square to a dark square to a light square. Kind of like checkers. If you played checkers before, you know that you play on this exact same board. But you probably might be unfamiliar with these new pieces. And if you're completely new to chess, this is the video for you. Today, we're going to only look at how the pieces move, and we're going to go each piece step by step. Once you master this, you'll get better and better, and maybe you'll be able to start playing real games. So today, we're going to look at all of these different pieces. First, I want to talk about one thing. As you can see, you see these numbers here on the right. You see there's an 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we are going to call these ranks. That's what they're called. And the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, those are called files. Okay, so now let's get started with our first piece. Okay, so I've changed the board so there are only pawns on the board. The pawns look like this. Each player gets 8 of them. The black ones start on the 7th rank, and the white ones start on the 2nd. Now, you're probably wondering, how does a pawn move? The pawn moves like this. The pawn can either go 2 squares first on its first move, it can go 2 squares forward, or it can move 1 square on its first turn. That's also an alternative. But after it moves 2 squares, it can never move 2 squares for the rest of the game. It can only go 1. So let's test this out. Let's move this pawn forward 2 squares. And right now, after it moves 2 squares, it can never move 2 squares again. But these pawns can because they're on the 2nd rank. Just think of it, if you're white, if the pawns are on the 2nd rank, that's the only times you can move them 2 squares. And same with black. If they're on the 1st rank, they can only move 2 squares. So now let's give a move for black. Black also has the option to move 1 square, like this. But remember, it can only move 1 square for the rest of the game. Now, you're probably wondering, what other options does it have? Well, I'll tell you how it can capture a piece, which is take it off the board. Let's put this pawn here and this pawn here. Now I'm going to show you how you can capture. The pawn captures like this, in a diagonal direction. It can't capture on these 2 squares, that's going backwards. The pawn can never go backwards, it can only march forward. So, how do you think this pawn can take a pawn? Well, as you can see, this pawn can just gobble this pawn. Watch closely, it can go to the square, and poof! That pawn is gone. Now, what can black do? What pawn can this black pawn take that's white? Also, you can never take your own color pieces. You can only take the other player's pieces. Well, it can obviously take this one. Gobble. That's cool, right? And now, what happens, let me put a pawn here, if the pawn reaches the other side of the board? When this pawn reaches to the other side of the board, the pawn can turn into a new piece. So this pawn can turn into a queen, a rook, a bishop, or a knight. But almost always it turns into a queen because queen is the best piece, and we're going to talk about that in this video. The queen, it can turn into this. That's pretty cool because the queen is the most powerful piece out of all of them. We have a video on under promotion, which means when the pawn promotes to a rook, a bishop, or a knight. But that is a little advanced, and if you're just starting chess, you're probably going to always promote to a queen. Okay, let's look at our next piece, and that is the knight. These are the knights. Each player gets 2 of them, and they start out on these 2 squares. For white, they start on these 2 squares, and for black, they start out on these 2 squares. What does the knight do? You might say it kind of looks like a horse. And like a horse, it can jump. And this knight can go pretty far. In any direction, it can go 2 squares in any direction and then 1 square in any direction, like this. It can go 2 squares up, like that. It can go like this. It can go like this. It can go like this. It can go in so many options. But as you can see, it's going in an L sort of shape, like this. It's going in an L sort of shape, like this. That kind of looks like an L, or this way, or like this. And notice all the squares that this knight can go to. It kind of makes a circle, like this. Now, let's put a piece on the board. Can the knight capture this piece, the white knight? No, it can't. It can only go in an L shape, not forward. How about if the pawn was over here? Yes, it can. What about for the other knight? The other knight can have the exact same powers. Let's put up 2 pawns. Which pawn can this knight take? This one. 2 squares up and to the right. And also, what's really cool about the knight, let's put it on this square, is it can jump over other pieces. Unlike the pawn can never jump over pieces. It gets stopped if it's in front of another piece. The knight, kind of like a horse, can leap over. So even though all of these pawns are in the way, it can leap over to these 2 squares, like this. That's pretty cool. Now, let's look at our next piece, and that is the bishop. These are the bishops. The bishops go here and here for white, and they go here and here for black. They start out on either the 1st or the 8th rank, depending on the colors of your pieces. What can the bishop do? The bishop can go really far at once. The bishop is a diagonal piece, and it can go like this, diagonal in anywhere as many times as it can. But if there's a piece blocking it that's the same color, it cannot go to this square. But let's say that was a white pawn. Let's put it there. The bishop can just take this, because the bishop can take any opposite colored piece as long as it's going in this diagonal formation. So let's see, like this, as far as it wants, in any of these squares, many squares. You might think this is the most powerful piece, but we'll show you that there's actually another powerful piece. But I want to talk a little bit more about the bishop. As I said, the bishop can't go through pieces, and actually the knight is the only piece that can hop over any other piece, and you've got to remember that. So, I'm going to give you a little quiz. Can the bishop go here? No, that's going sideways. Also, one important thing to know is that this is a dark squared bishop because it's on a dark square, like this. It's on a dark square. And this one is on a light square. And to know that you're moving it right is a dark square bishop is always going to stay on a dark square. It can never go to a light square. That's not possible. And with the light squared bishops, they can only stay on these light squares, any light square. So let's go back to our quiz. Can this bishop go here? No, it can't. First of all, that's a light square. Can the bishop go here? Even though that is a dark square, the bishop has to take 2 moves to get to that square. Notice that it can't go like this in one turn. You'll have to make 1 move, and after a piece does another move for the opposite color, it can go to the square it wants to. Now let's try it for the white bishop. Can the white bishop go, let's say here? That's a light square, but it has to take 2 moves. Like this, and then like this. What about here? Also 2 moves. What about here? It will never be able to get there because that's a dark square, and a light squared bishop can never go onto a dark square. Okay, now let's talk about the next piece. These are the rooks. The white rooks start on these squares, and the black rooks start on these squares. Let's see how the rook can move. The rook can go sideways in any direction, like this. It can zoom around the board. It can go, let's put the rook in the middle of the board, like this, and show you all the places it can go. It can go like this, up, down, left, or right. So, if it wants to go, technically, it can go to any square on the board, but sometimes it's not on one move. So let's say this rook wants to go to this square. Can it? And how many moves will it take? This is a quiz. What is the fastest way for the rook to get here? Pause the video to see if you can figure this out. If you said 2 moves, correct. Like this. How does it capture? Well, it captures in the exact same way that it moves. Let's put a piece here. This is the queen. The rook can capture the queen like this because this rook is going sideways to try to capture this. So let's try that. Ta-da! And the queen is gone. Now, what piece can this black rook take in one move? Well, this black rook has got his eye on this white rook. So this black rook can take this white rook. So, as I said before, unlike the knight, it cannot go to this square in one move. Okay, we're almost done. So now we're going to look at the queen, the most powerful piece of all. Remember when I said the pawn can promote to a queen, the most powerful piece? Well, now you're going to look at how it works. Let's put the queen in the middle here, and let's see her powers. She basically has the power of a rook and a bishop. So a rook plus a bishop basically equals a queen. So it can go up, down, left, right, and diagonal in any ways. Look at all those squares it can go to. So many to count. All of these squares it can go to. There's so many. So let's see the queen in action. You only get one of her because she's so precious. Look at how many squares that is. Okay, let's see. Can the queen capture this other queen? Yes, it can. The queen can move forward, as we just saw. Can the queen take this knight? No, actually it can't in one move, but it definitely can in 2. 1, 2. The queen can actually go to any square you choose for in 2 moves. So I'm just going to choose a random square, let's say this square. And that queen can go there definitely in 2 moves. Let's see that work. It can go like this and then like this. Or it can go like this and then like this. Or it can go like this and then like this. There's so many possibilities on moves to get to that square. That's pretty cool. So, as I said before, and I've said this many times, but you have to remember this. Even though the queen's so powerful, she's got to have some weaknesses. She can never go through a piece like this. Only the knight is, and that would make the knight one of the most unique pieces. Now, let's give you a little quiz again. Can the queen go here? And if so, how many moves does it take? Well, we already said if a queen can't go there in one move, she must be able to in two. So 1, 2. How about this square? Well, 1, 2. How about this square? She can go there in one move. The queen is so powerful, so even the weakest piece of the pawn, that can turn into a queen. So you have to value your pawns, because if you're able to get it to the other side of the board, that is very good. Okay, now let's look at our final piece. The king is probably the most important piece of all, but sadly, it is also the weakest if you don't count the pawn. The king can move, let's just put on the square, in any direction just once though, like this. All these arrows show it can go. So it's kind of like a big square around the king, and those are their options. And another really important thing, and we're going to talk more about this in later videos and part 2 on checks, castles, and checkmates, is that the kings can never be next to each other. This can never happen. This will never happen in a game. And if you see this in a game, that won't work, because the king can never be captured. It can be trapped, and that's what's called checkmate, but it can never be captured. That will never happen. So it has to have sort of like a wall around the other kings. So the kings, they kind of like zap into each other if they're too close. The king can still capture pieces though if it's allowed to. So let's see the king capture. Can the king capture this in one move? Yes, it can. Let's give a pretty hard quiz. Pause the video to see if you can figure out the minimum amount of moves that it will take to capture this bishop. Pause the video. Well, if you said 3, correct. 1, 2, 3. How about here? Well, it can go 1 square. How about all the way over here? Well, that's going to take a while. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are all the pieces in chess, and there's so much more to that. This video was a little bit long, but trust me, if you keep on practicing this, you'll get better and better. This was only our first video on the basics of chess, so make sure to stay tuned for part 2, which is how to win the game. We haven't even talked about that. Okay, thanks for watching.